Maybe it's about like being at an interesting like fork in the road in life. Because like now I'm pushing 40 and it's like life is different, and you would think that by now like things would be settled, because when we saw people that were going like approaching 40 or even their 50s, but like older people, they always seem so settled. They seemed properly aged, like they were old people, and they had lived life, and they were just like sort of in their comfortable positions with their company cars and looking after their families. And then here you are sitting in like 38, and so for me, I've gone back to school. You know what I mean? Like I've gone back to school. I'm on I told you I was on campus the other day because I'm doing these classes so that I can complete my master's degree. And then I saw somebody that reminded me of you on campus that day. So it's really funny that like now we're suddenly sitting together in a podcast.
Yeah. Do you know what's crazy? I realized we're the same age, by the way.
Okay.
I realized that when we were younger and we saw people who are older in their 40s plus, thinking the very same thing, that they've sorted things out in life, it was all a facade. Because people are going through it. We are going through it.
But us, do you know, like, I feel like a lot of everything that we were sold when we were younger is a facade.
Yeah.
Like, I've been reflecting on my career a lot because I knew my influences. You know, when we were growing up, there were rappers and actors and like politicians. There were slay queens. Actually, they weren't slay queens there. They were like called gold diggers. But people who were living like this big fancy life, and we aspired to it. We used to watch Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous. We used to watch MTV Cribs. Now, 20 years later, to find that everything was staged. You know,
hectic,
when Cribs, people who were like, "Hey, MTV, come into my household."
Exactly. Right,
and then it's not even their houses.
It's not their house.
They like hired those houses, and then here we are, an entire generation that are delusional because we thought, oh, okay, well, if I work hard enough, if I sacrifice the hours, if I sacrifice my well-being and my family time, I'm going to live like that someday. And now that entire machine, which is Hollywood, is like imploding in front of our eyes.
Damn. Do you know what's crazy though? So yesterday I was washing my car and I was chilling by the bench, and then this white old lady comes through and then asks if she could sit next to me. I said, sure, go ahead. So she sits there, and then we just spark up a conversation about blacks and whites.
Oh, yeah?
Then she starts saying that, you know what? The problem with blacks is that they have too many children. So I was like, so we're already going there. Like
right.
And you know, at that age, she doesn't have time to be diplomatic. She's like, hey, listen, it's 5 to chai, so I'll tell you what I feel like.
It's like, I'm going to die either way, so.
Yeah. So when she said that, I was taken aback, but I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be like, oh, yeah, you racist. No. Yeah. Let's talk. And what blew my mind is when we started speaking about the privileges of white people, right? And she said, people have this false misconception that we were all doing well.
Yeah.
She said that she used to earn 1,000 rands as a salary, and she does not have a pension fund or retirement fund. And the person right now who's taking care of her is her son, who happens to be a surgeon at a public hospital.
Okay.
And he can't even make life. Like, it's hard for him to even pay
as a surgeon
because Doctor and Tonton, the way they set up the situation, apparently, if you're looking to get into the private sector, you need to be granted by government. They will also have to allocate you. So if you want to open a private practice, I don't know how true this is, but she was telling me if you want to open a private practice, they will allocate you a town where you can do your practice, and they typically take you to like your small communities.
So I don't believe that, to be honest with you. And I'll tell you why is because, I mean, you go to Randburg, people are opening up practices all the time. It's like it's like opening any kind of business, right? if there's a demand for it, you can actually go and open up your practice. I don't think the government needs to permit where you open up a practice. But I'll tell you this, right? It's, my book is called The Problem with Black People. And it's based exactly on that. It's like these sort of cliches and sweeping assumptions that people make about why people of color are in the positions that they're in with complete ignorance. Like if we look at that example of, this idea that Black people have too many kids, not understanding that part of it is like, okay, there's lack of access to family planning. There's lack of access to sexual reproductive health services, because even if it is in my area, am I going to go and get those services and miss work and not be paid for that day because there's informal labor, an informal labor sector that a lot of people work in. So I guess not when I started writing the book, because I'd been writing this type of way for a very long time. But when I saw that there was this common thread to my writing where I'm speaking about how, you perceive us to be this way, but actually, you're wrong because there's a much bigger problem at hand. She speaks about how her son is looking after her, right? There's studies by Wits University where they speak about how for every middle income person, which in this country is predominantly white, right? How they only have to look after one other person. But if you come from a poorer household, you're looking after 2.5 people. So first of all, you're burdened with a much lower salary, if you have a salary at all. And then you must go and support 1.5 more people than any white person does. So I don't think it's fair when people say, the problem with Black people is that they are like this or they are like that, without properly acknowledging what's really behind all of those seemingly problems that they are supposedly responsible for.
Well, wouldn't you say that she's partly correct to saying that we're making babies too many times, too many babies without proper family planning?
Right, but then why isn't there proper family planning? Do you understand?
Okay.
When you go to suburbs where white people predominantly live, I don't know too many white people who live in the township. I mean, I know people who live in the township. I've seen white people live in townships before. But I don't know, here in the suburbs, they are properly operating government facilities, be it the police, the clinics are running, the libraries. I was distributing my book to libraries across Johannesburg recently, and the state of the libraries in the suburbs is so beautiful. You can understand why people want to read here. But when you go into townships and the shelves are dilapidated and empty, and some buildings exist but the libraries are not open because they don't have money to pay the staff, or they haven't opened since COVID. Do you know what I mean? It's one thing to say, Black people are not being proactive with their own situations, but then the services and facilities that are available here in the suburbs, they're not the same ones that are available in townships.
So going back to your book, and you know what I found quite interesting?
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm trying to find myself in the mix of society and its complications, right? Yeah. So what I realized personally, right, is that I am caught in between two worlds. I'm caught in between not being Black enough, right? And when I say Black enough, is that when I know the streets, I know how to get by on the streets, right? I know how to navigate it, but I'm not Black enough to be considered M2. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But at the same time, I'm not coconutty enough. Because in my being, I'm very conscious of the dynamics of race relations. Right. And for me, I feel like being your extreme coconut, you're being a sellout. You're not realizing the true plight of a Black person when you want to always subscribe to whiteness. It's take your own identity.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, would you not then say that is probably similar to the lived experience of a colored man?
In certain ways, yeah. Okay. And I mean, I wouldn't even I wouldn't frame that specifically as just what is a Black lived experience, South African Black lived experience. I also want to touch on that a little bit, because when I go to the US, guess who's black? You know what I mean? Like you are automatically relegated to blackness. It's only in societies like ours where there is a recognition of colored as being this middle ground, right? So I then also have those issues where, because I live a life that's not necessarily your typical township lifestyle. You know, like I grew up in the south of Joburg. I grew up in a township myself. But the life, it's 20 years since I've last lived there. You know, I don't live in my mother's house anymore. I've lived across the world. Of course, my outlook is going to change, but also there are certain things that are going to change about me. I think this perception that you have to perform blackness or you have to perform coloredness is really stifling to the community, because we're not allowed to be anything more than what is stereotypically us, right? And I think where I stand on that struggle is that if I don't set an example for generations to come, where you don't have to be, you know, the person who hangs out on the corner with your friends all day, you know, where I don't set that example where you don't have to be talking with a specific type of accent or styling your hair in a certain kind of way, where you don't have to be a sheep, where you're allowed to be different in certain ways, where you're allowed to like anime, or where you're allowed to like things that are not kind of stereotypical of what people expect from you, then we'll never see a shift where there can be different versions of us. I mean, I go to Comic-Con every year.
Really?
Yeah, I go to Comic-Con with my
That's
partner.
wild.
It's not even a me thing, right?
Right.
I'm not interested in like superheroes. I'm not interested in, you know, the Marvel universe or whatever, but my partner is. My partner is obsessed. My partner, we go to every new Marvel movie. One of the biggest things for me in my life that was a big shock is like the decor in our apartment. Like, I have a very specific taste, right? I like nice things. My partner likes Marvel, so now there's this interesting blend of like pop art, comic art, and the things that like, you know, I've always collected over the years. So I go to Comic-Con and I see lots and lots of black kids, and I love seeing that, right? Because it's like, think about it this way. There are people who now see themselves as the superheroes they read about. There are black versions of the superheroes. I didn't know there's a black Flash. I can't remember his name. There's a black Spider-Man. It's so important.
Captain America is black now.
Captain America. It is great to be able to see ourselves in those positions that were ordinarily held for white people. Because when you start to believe that Superman can be black, then that means you can aspire to be more than what people want you to be.
Okay, now, and I completely hear you and agree with you. But now let's remove the superficialness. And I'm saying superficial because of my limited knowledge, right? This is how I see it. So I'm saying that there was a comment that was made, and there was also, I think, on your TikTok and the likes, Trevor said something also to that effect. Yeah. And the lady that I was sitting with said the same thing when we spoke about, I was telling her, do you not sympathize with those people who used to be farm workers and they were ill-treated? They were made to eat with the dogs. Yeah. And then there was also that apartheid. And she said to me, she said, we didn't call it apartheid. We called it, I think, something about separate dwelling or separate living spaces. Okay. And then her argument was then to say, the reason why we considered your separate dwelling areas, right, is because the communities that we come from are different. Okay. And the only reason why I was like, there might be a point. I'm not advocating for separate living at all. Right. But I'm saying in that condition, at that moment in time, whoever might have even thought of that idea, I'm studying law, right? Yeah. And part of law, they talk about your separate dwellings and the likes, communities. Right. So they're trying to figure out what is law and how does law come about. And then they say that, especially in the African context, you find that law within how we perceive it in comparison to the Eurocentric law is that us, we kind of live the community ends up developing a certain moral, ethical code that then we now need to subscribe to.
Sure.
And then that becomes almost law to us, right? Now, our communities as blacks or colors, whatever, let me put that together, but I want to separate it at some point. Okay. So blacks and colors, we care about the good of the community. So whatever you do, find yourself within the good of the community. Whereas in a Eurocentric perspective, it's more about individual rights.
Yeah.
It's I care for me, look, whatever. And that's the reason why you can go to the UK and on a Saturday, beautiful Saturday, no one is having a bribe, no one cares.
Yeah.
They're indoors because it's all about themselves. They don't have that kind of communal perception that we have.
Sure, Ubuntu.
That exactly.
Right.
That Ubuntu. Now, in the context of this conversation of blacks and whites and colors, do you not feel like maybe to a certain degree there was a necessity to separate the dwellings so that we can understand each other? And when we have that conversation about let's kumbaya, and kumbayang is good, but you need to kumbaya without having to neglect your story, your community, your ethical, moral standing. And then once we come together, it's like, okay, fine, I understand that you're wearing a hat. I don't know why you're wearing a hat. I don't know what that hat symbolizes.
Okay.
It's something important to you. It might be even religious, but I need to respect it. However, in my culture, when we come into this room, you remove a hat.
Sure.
Do you see what I mean?
Sure. I'm also just wearing a hat because I've not had a haircut. So, this is going to exist on the internet. We're not going to look that way on the internet. So, no, I know that a lot of people like to speak about segregation in that way. And in actual fact, like we're as human beings drawn to the spaces where we feel more comfortable, right? So, for instance, like you get an immigrant who comes from India. They're likely to go and live in an Indian neighborhood here in South Africa because for them, that's their comfort. That's where they're going to find the spices they need for their food. That's where they're going to be able to have similar language. You know, you'll find in township spaces even like language is such a big part of where people live in township, right? But this idea that we were forcibly removed because we need to be near each other because we have things in common with each other is, I would say, like it's propaganda in a way, because apartheid never started for the sake of, for our benefit as brown people. For people of color, it was never for our benefit. It was moving people off of their land so that white people could have the best land. You know, in communities like Fitas and Sophia Town, which were demolished to accommodate these new white settlements, like people lived, all kinds of people of color lived together in harmony. So this idea that we can't live together in harmony is just false. It's like it's a false narrative that people propagate. I don't want to say which people propagate it, you know, but somebody's propagating an idea so that we can then believe, like, and I suspect it's got a lot to do with US politics right now. On TikTok, a lot of people are saying, oh, we should have segregation because, you know, segregation means that we are going to be able to spend our own money in our own communities. And, you know, that they're trying to paint segregation out to be this really good thing. And again,
that's wild.
If you think of where US politics is headed, they're trying to reintroduce segregation. So, of course, you're going to get the influencers make the content advocating for it.
Do you think it's their limited knowledge? If they knew better, they would not advocate for it.
Listen, I'm one of those people who believe that it's not even to do with them. It's that we know how influencers work. We know how platforms work. They make their money off of pushing ideas, of pushing brands, or pushing. So it's not far-fetched for me to believe that certain influencers are pushing ideology because they are being influenced in various ways, or would like to be part of movements that are advocating for that so that they can sustain themselves. I think that anything you see on the internet now has intent behind it that isn't necessarily for the oh, I was just interested in it. Especially content that trends. Content that trends has some sort of backing behind it. There's a support of those ideas, right? So I look at things that I see on the internet really suspiciously. I have to view that lens with that lens, because it's like we've seen this so-called fake news where everybody's pushing an agenda, even in the media, right? It's coming to light more and more that certain media outlets are pushing certain ideas that are political, that are ideological. And so you can't pick up a newspaper this day and be completely blind to the biases, right? You have to have a much more critical thinking around the media we consume. And it's sad though, because I mean, as a journalist, right, I have been a journalist for about 20 years now. And the things that we're taught at journalism school is objectivity, and you don't let your biases get in the way. But then you'll find that there are people who do that. And so as an institution, I don't know where we're headed. And I also feel that this distrust people have in media as an institution is because of the biases that have seeped through into the work.
Your book finds a very strategic place in this conversation.
Yeah.
And there is, I mean, English fails me. Is it ecofascism?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned...
Did you buy my book?
No, not yet. I wish I wanted to lie. No, not yet. But I did.
I'm gonna give you a copy. Don't worry.
Okay,
I'll get one to you.
Okay. And it was quite interesting because for me, from the bit that I saw and I read off the internet, it's quite an explorative nature to discuss why is it that we're pushed into this ecofascism state, right? Yeah. And my question is that to you, in this context, do you come with a solution saying that we need to find ourselves in a certain environment, a certain place, a certain community? Or are you saying that let's begin from, standard one? We're saying that there is differences and we need to acknowledge the differences, and we also need to acknowledge the actors that are part of these differences.
I think it is important to acknowledge difference, but I also think it's important to acknowledge the root of differences, right? I think it's so important to understand why the difference exists. Because that's the only way you can have a real conversation about transformation, is to know that actually, like the school system, now there's a conversation going on in the country about Afrikaans, right? Afrikaans schools and Afrikaners are arguing, actually, no, we need to have Afrikaans schools because our community speaks Afrikaans. So therefore, we need to be able to go through the schooling system, understanding things better in using this language. But then the government then allocates Black students to these schools who have no understanding of Afrikaans, right? And so this community is up in arms with the notion that they may not be able to operate in Afrikaans anymore, and that there's a movement to stop Afrikaans from those schools because we live in a greater society that is much bigger than just the Afrikaner population. And that when students come to a school not understanding the language and they perform poorly, they'll never be competitive in the work environment, because you give me a person who has all A's versus a person who has E's or whatever, or D's or C's, because they've not properly comprehended the stuff. You're going to have biases to the A student unless we can understand the reason why people have certain solutions in place, BEE, and not wanting to teach Afrikaans at school. It's not just because people don't want things. It's not a feeling. It's not like I woke up today and said, no Afrikaans in this country anymore, right? Nobody is doing that. They are saying, though, that there are lots of students, and because schools are so packed, that maybe a solution to the poor education we have is to try things differently. And so that's why I say, at the crux of it all is to firstly identify the reason why the differences exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's deep. No, honestly, because it goes back to that community conversation that I was speaking about. Yeah. Understanding each other's community, what are our moral and ethical principles, and then appreciating the differences in that. Going back to the initial conversation about colored people, do you not feel like being a colored person is a cheat code in life?
Yes. in many ways, yes. There's light skin privilege. There are studies that show that light skinned people are trusted more. There are studies that show that people who speak with certain accents are trusted more. Like there's a Model C accent study that's from UCT that shows this. So I am aware that I do have a certain type of privilege, but also to say that colored people are uniform is a little problematic, because I might be a light-skinned colored person who has, straighter hair, but then there are people who, because of apartheid, because of that sort of privilege, there are a lot of people who were traditionally black, who were Tswana, who were Xhosa, and who then, changed their surname to Grootboom and were able to pass as colored during apartheid, right? So they're all part of the colored community now. They all share the similar culture, but they're not on the lighter spectrum. Do you know what I mean? And so do I believe that they can experience privilege the way that I do? I don't think so. I think that there are certain colored people who are in a position of privilege just because of what they embody. But I think the tension there is that there's an assumption that all colored people benefit. And it then creates these issues of colorism, right? Where people want to have lighter skinned kids, where people want to have kids with straight hair, where people are choosing their partners for hair texture and this and that. And I think that, when you say cheat code, yes, in a way, for me specifically, I've understood that the color of my skin has made things easier for me, especially in my industry, especially in the media. When I was 5 years old, I was on Kidio and Pumpkin Patch, right? I went with my class. But on both of the episodes that I was on, the camera almost kind of fixed on me. And that also then gave me the belief that I was made for television, right?
So, what's interesting, because this whole conversation is now centered on this. And for me, again, I'm saying my limited knowledge, I am trying to juxtapose reality with this ideology of what would be the best society to live in. Because we started off by saying that, it would be best to have sort of an interracial community where we live together harmoniously. So that's the one ideology that we put on the side, right?
Sure.
Then which is what you had proposed. Then I said that, and I'm not proposing it, I'm saying that I kind of understand why that lady that I had that conversation, the white old lady, when she said, we didn't see apartheid as apartheid the way you see it. We saw it as separate dwelling because of the communal relations that you have, right? Okay. So now you've got those two juxtaposing views of what life should be. Now, if you look at it in the context of black, colored, and white, right? For me, the people that are supposed to have that, embody it, and actually push it for us are colored people. And I can even go as further to say
that's a lot of pressure on us.
True story. And I can even go as further to say that they are the ones you guys are the ones that are letting us down. No, I'm just putting it there. Now think about it like this. The truth is that there are views from the black community that feel like colors are a cheat code. And they would, if, let's say, for instance, have to relive their lives, maybe even consider being a colored, if they really completely against whites, let me put it that way. And the reason why is because when you're a colored, you're able to dabble into any community. You could be black, and it's how I started off to saying that I'm not black enough, neither am I coconut enough. So with a colored person may not be black, but is very much accepted, because we also, the whole colorism, we say, oh my gosh, you colored, you light skin, great, come, and then, even the marriage song, why would we sing that? It's because
which is a colored staple.
Exactly. So we actually put you guys high. In our views, based on colorism. Then with whites are seeing you to say that, but
There's a trust there, right?
There's
because
a trust.
Of the language, because of the
language, the skin tone,
assimilation, basically.
We know you literally are half white. In a way.
Well,
so
a little bit more complex than that, but like, yes.
If we have to just be rudimentary without putting all the complexities, we know you're half white. So that's why you find that even when during apartheid, colors were privileged enough to still work in comparison with the bosses and the likes,
right.
Boss John, and then Rona, it's, stay in the farm.
Sure.
So now, why are you guys angry?
About
why are colors angry when you guys are so privileged in this setting?
It's exactly what I've been saying to you, right? Okay. About privilege, about that light skin privilege, that there's an assumption made about the colored community that we are all privileged, right? And it's unfortunate because the way that I experience it, I don't even want to say the way that I see it, but the way that I experience it, it's colored people who are not, light skin, straight hair, that are not afforded education, that are not afforded those opportunities in the workplace, that are discriminated against. And I think it's like this weird tension between being colored or being assumed black, right? But then being colored and then not being able to access those opportunities that are set aside for colored people. So I don't think it's a matter of anger. And also, I do want to kind of push back and say, it's not that colored people are not working actively to achieve liberation in the democracy, right? If you go into spaces, into NGOs, if you go into the human rights commission spaces, there are lots of colored people who are trying to transform the law in their own ways. I know there's a movement that's trying to achieve the room for colored people to identify as Khoikhoi San, because that's part of the decolonial process. That's part of how do you get rid of these apartheid sort of labels of us, and how do we move forward as a country? And then hopefully someday on the government centers forms, it's going to be our indigenous identities. And it's colored people who are leading that. I don't see a lot of black people who are saying, oh, don't call us black, call us Zulu, call us Sutu, call us Tswana. It's so we are at the forefront of certain struggles that are trying to reshape the country so that we don't have to live with this colonial burden. And I think also there's a lack of acknowledgement that becomes frustrating, because it's always an assumption that colored people align or are co-opted into whiteness, right? And it also has a lot to do with culture, and I would say religion being one of those things, colored people being very Christian, having their traditional culture removed or even stigmatized, right? And so people assume that those things, the language, the religion, all of those things mean support of a certain ideology, which is supportive of whiteness, white supremacy. And it does exist for sure. I think we all kind of support white supremacy in different forms. When we live in our communities and we're light-skinned people are actually better, or, those biases that people have, because it's not just the white people who give us jobs or whatever that have those biases. Even within our own communities, there's the first chapter of my book speaks about how my grandmother used to scrub me with an onion bag and handy Andy to try and keep me especially white. And when I get feedback from my book, it's a lot of people who have gone through that experience. A lot of people are being scrubbed down with onion bags so that they can so that their skin can be brighter. And I don't know how we then start to. I love how Idris Elba, for instance, is changing perspective of what is beauty. I love that people are more and more looking at dark men as beautiful also, and dark women, but not in the same extent. I think women are still put under a very unfair expectation when it comes to beauty standards. I don't see a lot of dark women who are celebrated the way that dark men are being celebrated now. So I think that's an important thing to do, to be able to acknowledge beauty in self, especially when it's not the sort of Eurocentric standard of beauty, the excessive thinness, the fragility that you need to be considered beautiful by European standards. I think we are challenging that. And that's why you have your Donald Trumps and Elon Musks saying, oh no more DEI. There are too few white people in the world, so we need to make more white people. That's really what their mission is about.
Wow.
Right, because we've kind of become a society that is mixed. And there's so much beauty that's come with this mixture, not necessarily just genetic mixture, but cultural mixture, because I get to bring my perspectives, somebody gets to bring their perspectives, and when we melt together perspectives and find solutions together, like, they become more sound. There can be so much more creativity with different points of view.
What I'm picking up is that this fight, this plight for us to be in a better society, right? It is really a white versus black. And when I say black, I'm saying black inclusive, colors and black together. Where the issue is that there's so much division among the blacks, is that then the whites can still retain whatever, their presence and their essence within the community unscathed, whereas us, we keep battling between you and I, saying that you're more privileged. I aspire to be a bit of whiteness, that's why I'm a bit coconutty, and then you're saying, look, dude, I don't care, I'm just trying to live.
And it's by design, Oz. It's by design. Like, that's what apartheid was about. It was about separating communities so that they could not come together. Because if you look at the white population in South Africa is only about 10% less even, right? How is it that 10% of people still hold economic power, political power, the way that they do? How is it that percentage of people, and also less than that percentage because it's a certain group of that people. So let's say like that 7% that is Afrikaans has the ear of Donald Trump, manages to achieve refugee status so that they can immigrate to the States. There's political power there. And I think, yes, you're right, like operating in silos is never helpful. But also we don't need to let go of our differences. Do you understand? Like we don't all need to be a version of black that is the same. And I think that that's especially important because the things that I know, the things that I grew up with, the things that like were beneficial to my community might be beneficial to another community, and I might be able to learn from them. So I think we need to learn from each other's differences instead of trying to suppress each other's differences. Because there is a lot to learn about life. You know, I've been reflecting a lot about that recently. And like I said, especially in relation to the career that I've had, I've got to do amazing things in my life, things that I never would have imagined. Because for me, the biggest goal was always, one day I'm going to work in Joburg. One day I'm going to work there at the city. That Hillbrow Tower, that's where my life is going to be. And I'm going to live the life that I see on Generations. One of my favorite shows at the time was Hard Copy, you know, because I was going to be a journalist. That was how big my dreams were. And then, I got to do crazy things. But also, early on in my career, I was trying to fit in. Not like I was trying to do what I thought was necessary for me to climb ranks, because that's how a corporation works, right? But I only really found my authentic voice, which took me around the world, when I guess I was retrenched from my corporate job at Media 24, the one I thought I would be set for life. I thought I would be in that company for the rest of my life because it was just such a big company. There was room for growth. There was room to like jump around from this publication to that. But I was retrenched, and I was like, actually writing about the Kardashians, writing about, who Jennifer Lopez is dating now, it's not going to leave a legacy behind, and I want to rather focus on that. Why did I become a journalist in the first place? Because I wanted to change things in my community that I personally grew up with that I thought were wrong. And so when I started to do work based on that, the journalism based on that, the documentaries that I've made based on that, and then of course now the book that's kind of speaking to the communities, multiple that I subscribe to, and trying to address their struggles. I think awareness is such an important part of the thing, because if you don't know it, and if people don't know it, it makes it harder to achieve any kind of change in that, right? Because if you don't know that as a queer person, I face this struggle, I am at threat of this and this and that, you'll think, oh no, but like, why are they protesting every year at Pride? Why do they do that all the time? They have equality now, they have gay marriage, but does society know that in the Eastern Cape they're pushing to abolish gay marriage? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a constant struggle that everybody goes through. It doesn't matter that now we're into democracy, 30 years, but people are still saying, actually, maybe you should have less rights because you're like this. So I guess the awareness part of it, that's to kind of inform the public as to why things are important. And because I belong to, the Black community, the colored community, the queer community, the community of journalists, like people attack media freedom, I have to let people know this is what we're dealing with right now.
I'm happy that you brought it, because I was going to give my next question, which was to say that, first of all, I appreciate the fact that you said we don't all have to aspire to a certain same version of blackness. There's different versions of blackness.
100%.
Then now you also brought another element, and that's adding the complexities to this argument, where now you're saying there's also a queer aspect.
Right.
So if you are queer and you're within this mix and you need to try to find yourself, now worse off is that you're queer in a colored community.
Sure.
Right. How do you find yourself navigating these challenges, knowing very well that you want to live a kumbaya society? And I must add that if you're queer, you're even more sympathetic to the plight of being a communal society.
Right.
Because you felt ostracized and always been that person.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you really understand the value of needing community, right?
Okay.
Because when you're ostracized for community, like, it makes it so much more important. And I think when I was a student at WITS the first time around, I found a community. I found a community that accepted me for exactly who I was, and it was queer people. And so therefore, like, I owe a lot to the people that I met there, the organizations I became a part of, that I still work with today, 20 years on, because they shifted my world so radically to a point where I was able to love myself, that I was able to believe in myself, that I didn't need to shift and change for anybody else. I could tell you, Oz, being queer, being gay, being part of the LGBTQIA plus community is such a beautiful thing, because there's such a lot of self-acceptance that other communities don't have, and that other communities don't give each other. It's a community that says, come as you are, and we will love you, but we will also look after you. We will fight for you, we'll show up for you, we will come and protest at your workplace. Do you know what I mean? We will carry you if necessary. I have not experienced that type of love from any other community.
Yeah.
No. Not for now that I'm like really successful with, the book and the documentaries and, having spoken at the United Nations, a lot of people are proud of me. Lots of people are proud of me. People who were embarrassed by me growing up. People who were, like, for instance, my mother was always worried about me, about my safety, about the way that I was going to live, about also the shame I might bring to my very religious family with this lifestyle. Now I bring immense pride for all of them. But it wasn't always like that. And the sort of extended family that I formed with queer people, like that's what got me through this period where everyone else was ostracizing me. So
do you not feel like that's unfair? Because when you think about it from a black person's perspective, you need to have that coconut Model C accent in order to get acceptance. And only then they will say, oh, okay, a person has come in. Yeah, go ahead.
Wait, so you say, like, are you thinking that because I'm queer that I'm accepted better into, like, world spaces?
No, I'm saying from your personal journey, do you not feel like you had to achieve all of this just to be accepted by your family?
But you see, this is also the thing. Like, I didn't do all of it for acceptance. I think I became good at what I do or successful at what I'm doing because I became more myself. I really stepped into that role of, okay, this is what I care about. I want to write about this thing. I want to make a film about this thing. Not a lot of people in their professional lives can make decisions about the work that they do, but I think I would definitely encourage people that where you have the room to do things that are transformative. If you're in HR and you see that something is not right, like, I don't know, like formulate programs, pitch and promote programs that will fix that thing. I know a woman who's part of my course right now who works at a very Afrikaans-dominated company and then is really trying to enforce BEE criteria. Not because, oh my gosh, I need to see other black people, but actually, this is not in alignment to the law. So let's enforce the law. I think it's really everybody's responsibility to whatever extent that you have to try and uplift not just your community, but also to achieve justice in certain spaces where there is injustice. And for instance, underrepresentation is an injustice in itself. If you walk into a workplace and you can see there aren't many people who look like you, you have to start to understand why. One thing I'm very conscious of doing in my current role, right? When I contract work to people, I look for black-owned companies. I look for black creators because there's such an oversaturation of white creators in the space generally, in the media space, that, if I'm going to shift things, it's not just through my work, it's not just through the things I'm writing about or producing, but also I want people to get used to working with certain people that are not what they already know.
Okay, no, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the fact that you're saying that you're actually working towards it. And for me, what I found quite interesting is that it's like people who, to a certain extent, have been hurt significantly, they know how to treat others differently because they know how that hurt feels like.
Right.
So in that case, do you feel like society, outside of the queer society, have hurt you to such an extent that you don't want to see other people get hurt the same?
I would say that that's definitely one of the big motivators. I would say that my sort of empathy to communities that are not the ones that I'm immediately from. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can understand other people's struggles more because I've gone through certain things. I can kind of like identify with someone's hurt. And I think it's all just part in being human, right? I think I'm going to say something really controversial, but it's not quite, and it's not revolutionary. It's not something I've come up with, but like white people I don't think they can empathize very well because they don't understand hurt to the extent that brown communities do. I don't think they could really know what it feels like to be dehumanized. You know, that's a big thing about like the experience we have as brown people is the dehumanization aspect of it. I don't think white people can really get how insulting that is, or just painful. I don't even want to think that it's insulting, but it's painful when you dehumanize a person. And I think that's also at the root of one of the conflicts in our society in particular, is that because certain people cannot identify what that hurt feels like. Straight people will never know what it feels like to be degraded as a gay person. You know, you may have experienced insults thrown at you that has said to you, oh, like, you're not enough of a man because you're like a gay person. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to use derogatory language here, but like, as a straight man, you may have felt that way. That may have happened to you. But imagine being the insult. You know what I mean? Like, the thing that's being used to insult you, I am. And so I think that in society that there is definitely a disconnect on how other people experience pain. And because you cannot put yourself in those shoes, it becomes extremely hard.
So closing to wrapping this discussion. You know, I'm hearing you say this, and I'm completely in agreement. I'm asking myself, maybe the experience of hurt is a necessity for people to become more sympathetic. And the reason why I say that is because I used to, back in the days, I used to go to this Eden Glen Primary School, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember like it was yesterday, where we're playing in the soccer field, and something happened, nothing aggressive, and then this white kid right next to me spat on my face. Literally spat on my face. Fast forward, when I lived in Europe, one of my best friends, Hendrik Faller, who so happens to be actually a movie producer, he's into your space. Okay. Yeah. he white German guy became my best friend. And I'm asking myself that if perhaps, say, I didn't experience the hurt of your racial hurts, right, when I was younger and wanting to be accepted in a society, would I have then been so open to extent that I can be friends with you, I can be friends with another white kid, and yet also be best friends with a black kid? Because I kind of understand that how everyone is in a perpetual motion of hurt, particularly the brown, those who have experienced it. Yeah. But when you juxtapose that experience with a white person, their lived experiences, the hurt is only the parents saying no to a PlayStation. Do you know what I mean? And that's why for them, they can't fathom the kind of level of your lived experience, particularly as a queer colored man in a society that was not so accepting. So maybe that whole TRC, Truth and Reconciliation, was just nonsense. No, these guys need to experience hate the way we have experienced hate, so that they can understand the level of the need for communal acceptance. Because right now, within their community, they feel safe.
Or we need to build a society where nobody experiences hurt, right? Okay. I mean, I get your logic, right? I want to say that that's the aim of promotion of human rights, is so that we're not experiencing the hurt. And like, hurt and violence is not necessarily just the words and the actions, it's also the exclusion and the a lot of the deep inner, like that thing that we've been educated to believe. Those things need to shift. I'm actually, part of my master's program right now is changing academia so that those injustices aren't perpetuated. Because people do what? They rely on studies, right, to justify their actions in the real world. If government wants an intervention, they rely on the studies. They rely on the academic text that exists. So at some point, that's a root, and that's also one of the reasons why there's so much injustice perpetuated, because those academic spaces into your PhD and your master's level, there aren't many people of color who then progress into that, be it financial reasons or just systemic exclusion because they thought you didn't get enough marks to do it, right? So I'm part of that process now where I'm trying to change academia so that it can produce alternate knowledge that can be used more constructively in this multicultural society that we live in. As far as this idea that people need to experience hurt, it's funny you say so, because when I think of newer generations, right, 16-year-olds now, people who who didn't live through the 90s, who didn't even live through the 80s or whatever, like we're old enough to have seen the end of apartheid. I have vivid memories of like segregated toilets and things like that. These kids don't know that, right? And it's always a question of how much education do they need to understand the pain that we come from so that they don't forget, so that they don't let it happen to them again, right? How much of that do they need? How much do we forget? How much do we allow them to live as unhurt people? Because it's a beautiful thing to see a 6-year-old now who doesn't know racism yet. They will. We live in a very racist society. Eventually they will. But, you know, me being very aware of racism at the age of 4 or 5, knowing that there was difference, you know, it's completely different experience to a 10-year-old now. And so I think we are getting to a better society, but as much as we are progressing, there are certain places where we are regressing. The fact that there is this neo-Nazi movement around the world right now tells us that we are doing something right, tells us that we are moving away from that old system that just degraded us as people. And so they want us to go back to that. And that's why it's so important for us at this moment to be very grounded in this freedom. I love how the South African government is pushing back on the pressures for it to undo itself, for it to undo its laws, for it to, pull away from the Palestine, Israel, the genocide there. There's so much pressure on South Africa on a global stage to just step aside and to give up. But we're not. We're not. At the moment, our country is sort of holding the beacon for freedom around the world, and it's such an important moment for us.
It's that time we have to wrap up.
We have to wrap up.
Yeah. I thank you so much.
Thanks, man. I hope this was useful to your sort of exploration of self.
No, too much. 100%. And it's like a catalog of my lived experiences that I'm sharing with all. So, again, thank you for coming through.
Thanks, man.
I really appreciate your presence as well as your knowledge and the gift that you keep giving to us in form of books.
Yes, and I will make sure to get a copy of my book to you. I promise.
Okay. Shots.
All right.
Okay.
That was pretty cool.